I'm a better looking person than Kamala.
He said he's more beautiful than she is. Did you know that?
I mean, the comedy of that is super WWE. It's like, you know, it's sort of like, and I think there's where it gets interesting, which this whole kayfabe thing, which is, it's not meant to be serious. It's meant to be punking or gaslighting. It's meant to be funny. It's meant to own the libs. It's meant to be performative. You know, it's meant to be, you know, verbally aggressive, the verbal equivalent of a WWE chokehold, which isn't real either, but it's fun to say so. Who else would say that?
David Shields is the author of 24 books, including the internationally best-selling book, Reality Hunger. His most recent title was published by Sublation in September and is called How We Got Here. The book explores and explains how modern liberalism led to postmodern confusion. It solves for X when X is a MAGA mystification. It is a book that dares readers to engage in optimism. It requires that readers believe in the future and the past. It asks readers to look at the big picture. As our critic Dorothy Woodend put it in a recent review in the Tyee, quote, Shields' work is not an explication of the current state of global politics, but rather a cumulative approach to understanding why truth suddenly feels so tenuous and easily manipulated. In this episode of Diet Soap, Shields and I discuss the 2024 election and try to analyze the campaigns by evaluating how both candidates deploy culture war tropes. Given that both parties are attempting to garner votes while avoiding the opportunity for societal reflection and critical engagement that national elections are meant to create, we approach this campaign from the vantage point of disgruntled theater critics. David Shields and I will be meeting weekly to discuss the campaign right up until November 5th. And on November 5th, we'll be holding a live stream as the results come in.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs,
we still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Diet Soap is a Sublation Media podcast. All right, so as we head down the home stretch towards Election Day, David Shields has been nice enough to agree to come on to the Sublation Media channel and give us weekly updates and cultural analysis of the race as it goes along. This is our first attempt at that, so to begin with, I thought we'd just frame this as a question about what the concept of fake news might mean during an election cycle, especially this one, which seems to be jammed packed with fakeness from top to bottom in both parties. And I wanted to start by showing you what it turns out to be your least favorite comedian. And we will talk about that. But here it is. It's Norm McDonald on The Daily Show from back when Norm was alive. Luckily.
You are the first guest to sit in our new couch. Talk to me about
This is some couch, I'll tell you that, man.
What do you think?
I'd it. That's the highest compliment you can pay a couch.
It is a high compliment. It's just we have a minivan of nuns that is Have you ever felt a couch that you felt that way before this couch?
No, this is the first one, man. I'm a normal fella, you know.
Do you think it's the ultra suede?
It may be the, it has a alluring come hither look.
It has a bit of a nice slant to it, I believe.
It's a goddamn whore, let's be honest. No, it's a nice couch, it's a nice couch. I don't mean to disparage the couch.
TV is better when Norm MacDonald is on it. That is my posture.
All right, David. So let me have it. What do you think of that clip? And then how can we put this in the context of the campaign?
I think it's an interesting point because who cares if I like or don't like Norm Macdonald? I mean, to me, his post-mortem overvaluation fascinates me for a variety of reasons. I could do a whole segue on that, but I think the reason that you brought it up has to do with it does suggest that the memification of the JD Vance. I mean, I don't know if he even mentions the couch in his memoir, but some guy, I don't even know who it was, as we all know, someone pretended on page 307 or whatever of JD Vance's unreadable memoir that he talks about, I think, masturbating on or into or around the couch, and the guy just made it up as a joke. And I think your implication is that the guy maybe got the idea either from his own practices of self-abuse onto and into a couch, or from this thing probably goes back 15 years of Jon Stewart and Norm Macdonald doing a whole thing on couches. So I think it's a really interesting idea that the guy probably got the idea there, which, it does sort of relate to, I mean, that's interesting that it does relate to how I tend to view it. Everything is about symbolic and cultural theater. I mean, it's not exactly a new idea, but the degree to which contemporary politics is 100% about political theater, like, Kamala visiting the border and she wears a certain kind of clothes and a certain stride. And then, Waltz is called coach. And then Trump visits the Alabama-Georgia football game and Kamala shades him during his Alabama-Georgia visit. Everything is about symbolic theater. I don't know if this is all very Guy Debord or Jean Baudrillard, but it's unbelievable how, if I ever heard a discussion of an issue, I would fall out of my chair. It is 100% symbolic political theater. And I guess which sort of gets us, I mean, by all means, push back if you want, but I think...
No, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. I just want to go into Norm Macdonald a little bit because I do think there's some connection to JD Vance, because what you said about Norm Macdonald before we started was that you think he's overvalued, and he's been overvalued, especially since his passing, right? And that he just, from your perspective, he just represents kind of the lowest common denominator of bro culture comedy, right?
So it's all hugely, I mean, there is that really great essay by David Foster Wallace on irony and I mean, I actually had an interesting panel discussion with him in which I sort of pushed back against some of his ideas. I mean, you can't take irony out of culture. I mean, irony isn't some invention of David Letterman. It goes back to Petronius and the Satyricon and the first human being to notice there's a difference between the idea and the reality. There's always the shadow, as Eliot says, between the idea and the reality. He was sort of arguing we have to get away from irony. And under, I think, the influence of AA, he wanted to re-emerge as a sincere human being, which I think is a preposterous notion. But in any case, Letterman, was, briefly interesting in the early 80s, but then it just became this utterly habitual gesture in which everything was ironized. The cue man, the cameraman, the guy at the store. It had it was just postmodernism by fiat, in the sense that there was nothing rebellious or rambunctious about it. Just to, like, let's say I'm talking to you and I just endlessly ironize that, it's pretty dark in here, or that you're wearing a shirt that says I'm still with her.
Yeah.
I mean, at some level.
That's a Hillary Clinton reference.
Oh,
right?
I see.
I'm still with Hillary.
I got you. So there's a point at which, I mean, I guess the phrase I come back to a lot is the idea of postmodernism with a human face. I finally want to get to stuff and I think people like Bill Burr, Letterman, and all of his proteges, Conan O'Brien, that guy who would sexualize all of his guests. Oh, Craig Ferguson, just this endless ironization of the medium, to which I'm prone. You could say I'm a bit of a pot calling the kettle black, but I find Norm Macdonald, he would go on a show and tell a dumb joke, and it would be sort of funny that it was incredibly dumb. It's like, my God, we've been here since, Andre Breton in 1919. Like, I don't know, I probably sound terribly snobbish or whatever, but like the idea that it's cool to go on a talk show and just tell a long, boring joke. I mean, Mark Twain was doing that in 1890. So I don't know. It just seems like such a played out gesture. Like, and I just think, there's no there for me in people like, Conan, Craig Ferguson. And it's just utterly played out postmodernism. And it just feels utterly dead to me and super broy. And I just find it, no. Like, part of me is just very, I want to get to stuff, like that Kafka thing that I love is, a book should be an axe to break the frozen sea within us. I finally like stuff that cuts to stuff. And I think, this book that you and I have done, How We Got Here, tries to do that. So too the book Christian Existentialist and a Psychoanalytic Atheist Walking to a Trump Rally. I'm very interested in irony, but I'm interested in irony that finally yields to blood, you might say. And I think that is what I try and do. And I find people like, say, Bill Burr or Norm Macdonald, Conan, Craig Ferguson, et al. Jon Stewart, I think, in his reincarnation is really lost. Stephen Colbert, they all just are, you can just tell how utterly bored they are with their own shtick, I think.
Well, with Norm Macdonald, my an admiration for him became almost a fixation after he died. And I do this sometimes because I did the same thing with Charles Grodin after he died.
I did love Grodin. I was a huge, that dead voice I was fascinated by.
Yeah, but both very ironic. They both did very well on Letterman. I think Grodin was even more of an iconic early Letterman guest.
Grodin was just amazing. That flatness. He was amazing.
Yeah. And so what I liked about Charles Grodin, well, first of all, they both died right around the time that I got divorced. So I was probably at my low point. And what I liked about Norm Macdonald and Charles Grodin, both, but probably more Norm Macdonald, was you talk about, or Bill Burr, you talk about this bro culture, that there's a kind of masculinity embodied by Norm Macdonald,
totally,
which I think I would ultimately explain by pointing out that he was Christian. That he was.
I forgot that part.
Yeah, he was not like a born again evangelical Christian, but he was some kind of committed Christian. That
interesting. I forgot that.
Yeah.
If I ever knew it, that's really interesting.
So like he went on a radio show and they asked him, so how how's your love life going? Do women throw themselves at you at these stand-up comedy events? And he's like, no, they really don't. And also, when I was a young man, I had a lot of sex, but I'm a middle-aged man. My life, it doesn't revolve around that bodily activity. And it's a shameful act, and
see, that's really interesting. I guess in a way, I'm terribly interested in contradiction. So that's very interesting.
Yeah. He's like, it's when you're just interested only in bodily gratification, that's the way of a child. But as you grow up, you try to become a man. And ultimately,
that's beautiful. That's fascinating.
The most important thing about life is that you're that it's tragic end, that what you have to face, and as a person who's alive in this world is how you're going to die alone.
Yeah.
And we cling to each other, and we try to deny this through sex or romantic relationships or what have you. But I choose not to do that. I don't want to drag anyone. I want to cling to someone as I'm spiraling towards the abyss.
Wow.
I want to do it by myself.
Amazing. I mean, that's like, I mean, I don't know if any of that got into his act. Maybe it's implied that all that deadpan voice is meant to be in conversation with human mortality. That's really beautiful.
Yeah, he did a whole comedy routine about death.
Wow.
And he was
specifically about how he was bored by yet another sexual assignation, and that he understood that no,
he didn't do that. What he said in that, I've never heard him say what he said in that interview on in a comedy act. But the other thing was that these morning radio people were like all filled up with like, you need to see a therapist. There's something wrong with you. Like, you're depressed. What, are you on anything to treat this? That was their response. Was not.
Yeah, like you have to take advantage of your, sort of semi-celebrity sort of.
Right. If you're not trying to gratify yourself all the time, then you're something mentally wrong with you. So, but I do think that there is something profoundly conservative in all of that I just described, right? What he said, like sex is shameful, and we are oriented towards death. I mean, there's a Heideggerian component to that, right?
Definitely.
So, and the other thing was, everyone would say after he died, Norm Macdonald was incredibly well read. He was a very brilliant guy, but he played dumb because that's what he thought a comedian should do. The comedian shouldn't try to play to his audience as if he's smarter than they are, but rather so everyone in the room can laugh. And so, I don't know, but
that's really beautiful. And that's very generous of him, because I somehow do look up clips of him sometimes, because people say, oh, this is the funniest thing you've ever seen. And he'll go on. And now I feel horrible, of course, that I've been critical of him, not because he died, everybody dies, but he sounds so thoughtful. But, like he'll go on Leno or whatever and say, I don't know, just make some dumb pun. And everyone thinks it's hilarious. And it's like, only by the standards of Hollywood is this sort of literate verbal play. I mean, he's just not that interesting. But to me, I'm terribly interested in what I think of as maybe the reification of your masculinity during your divorce. If Grodin and McDonald gave you a bit of a lifeline, in the sense that in their depression or their deadpanness, they were giving you a bit of a comic life raft to hold on to, that, and again, I'm not trying to play like,
and I went back and I started watching all the old earliest days, Late Night with David Letterman. I found it like I could get through the night if I would have a beer and watch Late Night with David Letterman from 1985 or something.
Wow, that's so fascinating, because you probably got married around 85.
Yeah, I got married about 95, but I got but one of the first things that I shared with my ex, because we were high school sweethearts, was we both really liked Late Night with David Letterman.
Exactly. And so you're watching, it's so beautiful. Like there's this, I'm very, very interested in what I call the critical intelligence in the imaginative position, which often takes the form of like, a book in which a guy is going through a divorce or a cancer treatment, and he spends the whole book talking about, some album. But in talking about the album, like say Andrew Monson's book Predator, or Jeff Dyer's book Out of Sheer Rage about D.H. Lawrence, or, Nicholson Baker's book You and I about D.H. Lawrence, about John Updike. And, where like you were going through very deep emotional things, the rupture between yourself and your then wife, and that here you were processing it quite powerfully through, these talk shows that you guys loved, and that are, to me, hugely about masculinity and the male gaze. And it's very hard to be a woman on those shows unless you're like hugely you know, down with the bros, and it's really interesting. I mean, and I know that's so moving to me. Like you could, you know, if you, it's not really the kind of writer you are, but like a diary where you were watching Letterman and it slowly but surely got you maybe out of your funk. I mean, it's basically the book that I have coming out in a year and a half called Failure is the Only Subject, in which I got, you know, as it were, through my divorce by obsessively watching poetic documentary movies, which gave me the succor, if that's how you say it, you know, the sort of succor to get through the very difficult reality that I was trying to navigate in a different way. You were apparently trying to heal your heart obliquely through these talk shows. That's really interesting to me and very, very moving. And, you know, I don't know, I don't think you kept a diary at the time, or did you?
No, I didn't. No, I should. I'd like to. At the time, I did think eventually I'll write a book about being divorced, but I thought of it as
Right.
as a way to catalog my dating life, and I would tell the women who
Right.
I'd go out with, "You're going to be a character in my book." It was a pickup
Yeah,
line.
that's not always the best. Yeah, everyone loves that. Yeah.
Well,
But
no,
I
people
guess, you
did.
know,
People
just
were
to,
people were excited. Oh, you're an author. Oh, you're going to put me in your book.
oh, I see.
Yeah, yeah. But hey,
I see. But in it,
go ahead.
I was just going to do like a whole thing. I was going to pivot almost like a talk show host
Okay.
from this idea of reification of masculinity to Trump, you know, saying that Kamala Harris is mentally disabled, or what's his other phrase? Mentally impaired. That's it.
Right.
And I guess for me, you know, I guess, you know, you know, I think our charge to ourselves is to try to take the week's news and try and impose, as it were, a lens of, you know, of your work and my work, specifically of this book and film, how we got here, and then the other book about that Scott Kent Jones and I did about Christian existentialists and psychoanalytic atheists walking to a Trump rally, try to impose some of those ideas onto the day's events, and not impose it a bad way, but to read it through the lens that I have, and to a large degree, that you have. In some ways, I have learned it from you, or I have built it, you know, through talking to you over the last year or two. So I think to me, a test case comes up virtually daily. Like a week ago, I was obsessed. I mean, 2 months ago, I was obsessed with how Trump framed the assassination attempt, and then the second assassination attempt, and then the I Hate Taylor Swift. I feel like I had a reading of that nobody else had, and I guess that we missed the chance.
Well, tell me
talk
what it
about
was. Tell me, because we can lead into what your how it
Yeah.
connects to Kamala.
Well, yeah,
Kamala.
it does.
Kamala.
It it does connect with Kamala, where like it's my girlfriend's a therapist. I think that your girlfriend's a therapist too, I think. But in any case, I said, I'm obsessed with Trump's phrasing, I hate Taylor Swift. She goes, oh, he's just a child. He's petulant. He's like a 6-year-old who, you know, the teacher told him to sit down and he says, I hate the teacher. And I'm like, no, there is a method to his madness, you know. And I think, what is it? There's a few things that are conspiring, and this relates to Kamala is mentally impaired and mentally disabled, and maybe the two will lead into each other. And by all means, Doug, jump in and push back or whatever.
I happen to know that well before Trump says I hate Taylor Swift, there was a conversation going on, even amongst leftist men, that perhaps Taylor Swift was overrated, that the Swiftie phenomenon was odd, that the people who were attracted to Taylor Swift were a certain kind of, let's say, Karen, wine mom type. And
or that Karen wine mom's children is who, I mean, it's for, you know, 13-year-old girls, isn't it?
Well, but the secret is it's as much for the moms as it is for the kids. and that uh, uh, what comes to mind was there was a show on PBS back in the early 2000s called Zaboomafoo, where the Krat brothers would hang out with a lemur, and the Krat brothers were these mid to late 20-year-old men, and they were buff and handsome, and all the moms loved to watch the show with their kids because they're
That's funny.
these young men who were very handsome and all that. And I even was dragged to the Portland Zoo to meet the Krat brothers by my ex and her female friends, who was like, oh, the kids really want to meet them. And but really, who wanted to meet them? And so I think the same thing's going on with Taylor Swift. The Taylor Swift has a fan base which is maybe half teenage girls, half white women, middle-aged white women. And so, and there was a kind of conversation about, is Taylor Swift any good? She's way overrated. Her music
I think she's terrible. Like, I'm not a fan. Like, I think it's the most pop, meaningless existentialism for 9-year-olds. I mean, it's just terrible. So I'm under no, I think she's a terrible singer, a terrible musician. I mean, that's not even to debate.
I've had a number of women in my life tell me they really love Taylor Swift, and send me clips, like music videos of hers that they relate to. And what I think,
I mean, it's like, it's for people who have never read it. Like, what was it? What was the title of that album? Something like Poets Department, as if she's a poet. I mean, it's so ridiculous. I think so. I mean, I'm sure I sound like some old white guy, which I guess I am, but like, to me, the point isn't whether she is or isn't good. I think she's a terrible songwriter, a terrible singer, terrible dancer. She's just not good by any measure of art. She's not an interesting musician. But putting that aside, Trump was endlessly courting her, hoping that she either would stay silent or would endorse him for some reason. And then he said, oh, I think she's so beautiful. He tried to court her. She's extremely beautiful, blah, blah, blah. And then then she endorsed with, I'm not sure if she wrote it, but who knows that, after the first debate that she posted, an endorsement of Kamala Harris. And then, Trump stewed on that for a few days. And then I thought, with a kind of typically mischievous brilliance, a malevolence, he entered, otherwise there's a few things going on. One is the algorithm. Second is WWE. And third is, the thing I try to argue in how we got here, and in a way is the topic that you have presented to us, namely fake news. Everything is cultural and political and symbolic, especially masculine and feminine theater. So when he says, I hate Taylor Swift, I'm sure he felt it. Like, I'm mad at Taylor Swift. I wish this blonde beauty, endorsed me. Okay, but there is method to that madness. One, it really does move the conversation around. And people who are Taylor Swift fans are, she's already connected to what is his name? Jason Kelsey? I forget his name. He's the tight end of the Chiefs. Anyway, Kelsey. And so he's sort of on the left-ish. And so that it was terribly unlikely she was going to endorse Trump. Anyway, the point I'm trying to get to in my long-winded way is something like, there is masculinity in pushing back. It's a deeply wounded masculinity, and it's kind of pathetic, but it's sort of like taking the conversation back. It's something Trump has learned unmistakably from Vince McMahon and the whole wrestling universe. That I published a piece about it in McSweeney's, where I interviewed Sean Gorman, the wrestling manager, and then the Washington Post printed a short part of it. It's helped me understand how much Trump has learned this strategy of endless aggression, endless algorithmic building, partly from WWE, but also it doesn't matter whether he hates or doesn't hate Taylor Swift, or whether it's a ridiculous opinion, or whether she is or isn't a good songwriter or singer. It has to do with who's controlling the conversation. It's, as you know, in the book, I try and track and how we got here, how the death of God led to the death of truth, led to the right wing's demonization of deconstruction through Vladislav Surkov, Putin's brain trust, teaching authoritarians across the globe how to weaponize deconstruction, relativity, and subjectivity. Like, to me, it's understanding in a way that the critic has the final word, that there is a kind of death of the author in a way, in saying, I hate Taylor Swift. You become the writer, you become the songwriter, you are writing over, you're erasing Taylor Swift. And then the conversation becomes about that. Anyway, to me, it's related to the recent thing. Kamala Harris is mentally disabled. She's mentally impaired. Well, I mean, I feel like I'm jabbering at you, but tell me what you thought of that line, and then I'll see if I can build off of it.
Well, I've been watching Trump supporters as much as I've been watching Kamala Harris supporters. I know I gotta say it right.
I know.
But obviously, the fact that I've been watching both is probably why I say it wrong some of the time. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And the rumor has been for quite a while, before she became the nominee, even, was has been that she has an alcohol problem, that she is drunk a good portion of the time. And
where are you seeing that?
I'm seeing that in right-wing media. So like I heard it from people who listen to Fox News, and then
that's quite an accusation. I think you.
But once you think about that, once you're told, oh, she's drunk a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Her mannerisms can appear as inebriation when you watch her speak. The
excessive laughing, the coconut tree. It's a way to frame all that. I just think she's nervous and shy. I mean, I have no knowledge whether she is or isn't drinking.
My impression of her was formed during the 2020 primaries and the Democratic primaries, when I was very, very following it very closely, because I was a supporter of Bernie Sanders and I thought he had a chance to get the nomination.
Yeah.
And her first appearance in the major media, like her big moment in the primaries, was one where she called out Joe Biden for being a racist.
That was a good moment in which she said, I was that little girl. That was right. Good theater.
It was good theater, but then it turned out like the next day, she actually would have voted the same way that Biden did on the busing issue, that she didn't actually oppose Biden's position on the busing issue.
Interesting.
She walked it back. And so it struck me as a moment of fake news. It was a performance that was fake. And then after Tulsi Gabbard had her way with Kamala in that primary season, where she went after her her record as a prosecutor in California, I really thought, and that's when after that she had to drop out. She didn't win any delegates. So there's something about her, because of the way she came onto the scene, got a lot of media support early on, a lot of good press around something that turned out to be untrue, like a fake out, and then was defeated by her own record that gave me the impression that she was phony, that she was like that she was a centrist establishment Democrat along the same lines as Pete Buttigieg, who I also didn't like for having come forward after Iowa and claiming victory when he didn't win the majority of the votes, when he didn't win the votes. So from my perspective, the people would say she's impaired based on the fact that there's a disconnect, there's a distance between what she says and the reality of her politics, and also because of the vapidity of her statements, of the way in which she says a lot, but to really communicate very little. So that was my first impression of what.
Interesting. I mean, yeah, I think that you and I tend to go in different directions. Not that our politics are wildly separate, but you tend to, I don't know what it is. You kind of, maybe you are following, far right media far more than I am, and you're in a way more inherently.
I was not in 2020 when my first impression of her was formed, but now in this election cycle, especially because we're making this documentary, I am following both sides of it, and I find them both.
Well, even the metaphor that you used came from right wing talking point, where that you fell into the metaphor of had her way with her, which I forget who it was. I think it was Tucker Carlson or somebody on Fox, maybe Jesse Waters or somebody, who said that the generals were going to, quote, have their way with her, which has had an unmistakable aura of sexual assault, even of rape, where they said, if there's a war, the generals will have their way with her, which was very strange language. And again, very intentional to use her physical beauty against her. I mean, she's 59 years old and she's, stunningly beautiful. She just is. And, it's fascinating how they, have her way with her. The generals were going to have her way with her is incredible language. And
yeah.
And so
in my defense, it was Tulsi Gabbard, another woman.
I know, but I still feel like, in a way, it's fascinating, the memification of language, where that phrase has entered American political discourse as semi-acceptable. And that, anyway, the thing I think Trump was doing with mentally impaired or mentally disabled is, I mean, I would agree with some of it, and that she's not a brilliant human being. She's a pretty, I think she's a person, again, I probably sound kind of pretentious, but she's a person, I think, of average intelligence. I think she's relatively composed in public in the way that most of us probably aren't. She has a kind of dignity about her, a poise. I think she did extremely well in the debate. She clearly won the debate by any measure. She's very skillful in a certain rhetorical way, but she's not like some intellectual giant. She's just not. And if you read her books, you can see how obviously that's the case. But that to phrase, it's very much, I hate Taylor Swift, and again, talk about, of course, pot calling the kettle black. There is much conversation whether Trump at age 78 or 79 is, of course, showing clear cognitive decline. That's pretty, it's not Biden-esque, but it's getting worse, as it would for anybody 79. And I think one thing, I'm not saying anything as well as I'm trying to say it, which is something like the fact that we're even talking about it, that's Trump's point, in the sense that when he says, I hate Taylor Swift, suddenly the conversation, I'm trying to think of what Trump has learned from a kind of how we got here deconstruction. It's that, I don't know what, I'm trying to articulate it, but I can feel it in my bones, which is, maybe it's what you would call fake news, and what I would call something like the postmodern deconstruction of reality. So there is no longer a there. Clearly, Kamala Harris is not mentally impaired. She's a person of probably average or slightly above average intelligence. Biden was clearly showing cognitive decline, as one would at 81. But the moment that you do that, it's very much, like I hate Taylor Swift, where your aggression, your masculinity, your owning of the moment, your verbal sword fighting, it's like, wait, suddenly now Kamala Harris has to figure out how to defend it. And I think that question interests me a lot.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.